In the Middle East, the line between diplomacy and confrontation can shift overnight. Just as fears were growing over a wider regional escalation, diplomacy appeared to open a narrow window to contain the crisis, at least temporarily. US President Donald Trump announced the suspension of a planned strike against Iran following mediation efforts led by Gulf states, while Washington and Tehran continue exchanging proposals through Pakistani channels in negotiations that go far beyond the nuclear file itself. Reports point to possible mutual concessions, American flexibility regarding certain peaceful nuclear activities, and discussions over the release of frozen Iranian assets in exchange for keeping talks alive and avoiding open conflict. But despite the diplomatic momentum, the threat of escalation remains very real. Washington continues warning of military action if negotiations fail, while Tehran insists it will not negotiate under pressure. So, are we witnessing the beginning of a new understanding between Washington and Tehran, or simply a fragile pause again under the shadow of mutual threats? And what about the Israeli entity? Would it accept any agreement that leaves Iran with even limited nuclear capacity? Or is the region heading toward a broader confrontation whose consequences could extend far beyond the Middle East itself? We answer these questions and more with our panel of guests in just a moment. And to discuss the diplomatic calculations, the regional implications, and the future of negotiations between Washington and Tehran, we're joined tonight by two distinguished guests from California, Professor Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean of the University of California. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, Miriam, and a pleasure being with Dr. Aris-Kessé.
Always the most welcome in our TV programs. And so from Miami, we're joined by Mr. Arisqi Dawood, CEO of MEA Risk LLC.
Thank you, Miriam, and greetings to your guest as well. Just a quick note, I'm actually coming your way from Boston this evening, so just a quick correction.
From Boston, thank you for joining us, Mr. Arisqi. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. And maybe to start the discussion, Professor Hamoud Salhi, let me perhaps begin with you. So from a strategic and academic perspective, how should we interpret President Donald Trump's decision today to suspend the planned strike on Iran? Are we looking at a genuine shift in the American approach, or just simply a tactical pause driven by regional mediation efforts?
So it could be genuine in a sense that it is a way of protecting American interests or a fear out of retaliation. But it's certainly, from what we've seen so far, this is not the first time that we've seen a postponement like this. And one starts to wonder whether this is part of the game. It's to extend in this conflict and to a longer period until perhaps the idea that the Iranians will feel the hurt by the blockades. But certainly this time around, we have to look at certain factors. Number one is that this is come, according to President Donald Trump, after sort of requests from his allies. And this comes also in light of what we know, that this time around, the Iranians would retaliate strongly, much more than it happened before, and their target will be the Gulf state. They will be targeting the energy, oil, and so on and so forth, and that will have a huge implication of the production of oil internationally, not just the supply. The second factor, to be very brief, is that in the plan of this recent of the upcoming retaliation from the Iranian, we are told that they will target businesses in which President Donald Trump has invested in, particularly in AI, and particularly this will be in the UAE, where the UAE is presenting itself as a hub of a future in the future in artificial intelligence. That will put those plans on hold. And more than anything else, it will also put Donald Trump's businesses in jeopardy. Those are the reasons that may drive Donald Trump to take this as a genuine from that perspective, but it's still a tactical until we see something else.
Still a tactic from the part of Donald Trump that we have seen before in the past 2 and more months. Mr. Azri Dawood, you closely monitor geopolitical risk and regional stability. To what extent have Gulf mediation efforts succeeded in preventing the region from sliding toward perhaps direct confrontation? I'm talking about today. And are these capitals now becoming indispensable players in crisis management?
Well, Miriam, it's a mixed bag, right? I mean, so far you could argue that if there were any mediations from the Gulf nations, it hasn't really fully succeeded, right? Those are very powerful nations. They're nations that have very strong economies. They are parties to the conflict. They influence the United States, particularly they have the eyes and ears of, especially the ears of Donald Trump. And so they do have certainly an impact insofar as that the impact is to pressure the U.S. not to get into a deeper conflict, is to focus more on the diplomatic track, if possible. And remember, Qatar has always been a leading negotiator, particularly when it comes to the Iran issue. If you recall, Saudi Arabia started to renew its diplomatic relations with Iran not long ago. So they're very important. Are they effective? Not as much as we would hope so.
Not as much effective as we hoped. Professor Hamoud Salhi, reports speak of the 14-point proposals being exchanged between Washington and Tehran. In your view, does this suggest the negotiations have entered a serious and advanced phase today? Or are the core disagreements still too deep for a breakthrough? We still talk about the major disagreements that are not resolved until today.
True. And if we talk about procedure, we could see that there are some sort of procedures in place. We've seen some hope or some practical decisions to negotiate. There are mediations going on. There are international pressure that we think is going on. And then at the end of that, Donald Trump comes in and says that we are going to put on hold because we want to give negotiations a chance. But in reality, the parties still sort of at far extreme. They still hold positions that are sort of irreconcilable. The United States still wants limits on nuclear power. They still want limits on enrichment, or for that matter, continue to insist that Iran not having any enrichment, and the Iranians still wants guarantees that they will not be in a future conflict, that they want some kind of reparations, and more than anything, they are saying that there is no negotiation about their willingness to pursue nuclear power.
No willingness to stop pursuing their nuclear powers. Mr. Azri, from a geopolitical risk standpoint, what are the most sensitive issues still blocking an agreement? Are we still talking about the real challenge of the nuclear enrichment itself, or Iran's missile capabilities and regional influence? What is it really?
I think it's all of the above, Miriam. I think the professor listed a number of grievances and issues that remain unresolved.
Yes.
The big question mark is what is in the mind of Donald Trump? What is it at the end of the day that he's looking to achieve? And right now, he's looking to achieve some kind of an exit strategy that will lead sort of to the November midterm elections in a ways that the Republicans would not, be expelled from Congress. I think that's the number one. What is it? Well, it's all over the map. It's the nuclear issue. It's the enrichment issue, separate from, obtaining nuclear weapons. It's economic. how are the Gulf countries going to see Iran strengthened? It's about the tolls that Iran wants to charge for using the Hormuz. It's about Israel. How is Israel going to think about all of this? It's about the U.S. releasing, the money that it's been holding for Iran. All of this, I very much doubt that we are at that stage where at least one issue has been solved or a decision has been made. I think at the end of the day, as I said before, there are talking. The pace suggests that this is a very slow process, and we're going to be probably talking about this for the next few weeks to go.
Next few weeks we will still be talking about it. Do you think, Mr. Salhi, that Washington could accept a limited Iranian nuclear program under strict international supervision? We are seeing some reports suggesting some American flexibility regarding those peaceful activities or peaceful nuclear activities.
Well, the premise, we have to look at what is American flexibility means. At this point, when the American talks about flexibility, they mean that the arrangement will be done or will be monitored at a certain level by an outside force, if not the United States. That would be that's the sort of their farthest point, by maybe a country or an institution, i.e. or others, that they would have control on it. So that is sort of the main issue, and it remains the main issue. The United States has moved from the idea of regime change, then nuclear issue. Now it's enrichment, and today we also hear that Iran would never have any nuclear power. Yes. We are still really at a negotiation about negotiation. We are still sort of manipulating public opinion for whatever reasons. More than anything else, because we know in the end, as Rizqi said, there is a player on the other side. There is Israel, there is President Donald Trump, personality, and these are subjective for the American president and more for the Israeli, the entire big grand design of Greater Israel. So those are really what determine the end of this conflict. And at this point, Israel wants the United States to continue to be involved, and inflexibility that we see by President Donald Trump has to be put in a context. The United States wants Iran to surrender in way or another and come back to the United States the way they like to see to have seen Venezuela regime ended there.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Dawood, while Washington continues to avoid confirming reports on sanctions relief or the possible release of those frozen Iranian assets, is this ambiguity mainly driven by domestic political constraints in the United States or pressure from regional allies?
I would believe that it would be both. It would be both. I mean, just imagine for a moment, a chunk of the Trump supporters and allies all of a sudden, hearing about concession to Iran. Those are, a lot of them are hawks, a lot of them are pro-war, and a lot of them want to see the conflict expand. And so there is certainly a political price to pay if he goes that route, which eventually he will have to. So, but how do you manage that? It's a billion-dollar question. The other is, how will the regional powers, or the Gulf countries in particular, but also Israel, are going to sort of see that? How is an enriched or a financially better off Iran would affect their standing in the region, and how will Iran become sort of a regional power? So yes, to your question, absolutely, it affects all of the stakeholders in this conflict.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Salhi, if understandings are reached between Washington and Tehran in the near future, how deeply could that affect global energy markets and broader international economic stability? I mean, the economy has been, the global markets have been suffering for a while.
So the immediate effect is that you have stability in the global market, meaning that there is less fear about oil prices to go higher rather than they'll be going down. So from that perspective, that would be good news. But then the reality on the ground is different. For example, the prices are likely continue to be as high and they will decline very slowly because of insurance, because of also a lack of oil production to the extent that it doesn't meet the production, the need and the demand in the market. So there are serious questions that will take a longer time for the market to go to what it was before, but that will be good news on many respects.
Good news on many respects. Mr. Dawood, despite the ongoing diplomacy, the talking, the region continues actually witnessing security escalation, including drone activity over Saudi airspace. Algeria has condemned it. And how serious is the risk that one incident could derail the entire negotiating process?
Well, obviously, it is absolutely serious. And it's something that happens all the time in conflict zones. And in this case, you have enormous amount of assets, naval, air, ground, troops as well. You have the Gulf with there. So yes, so any little thing could lead to a much more intense conflict. However, I have to admit that I did sort of anticipate the conflict to start a while back, to resume again a while back. But what we're witnessing, where both parties seem to hold their positions despite the skirmishes and the occasional incidents that you see. So I think we're going to see more of that going forward, where you will see skirmishes and activities here and there, but it does not reflect the general will of those tasked to negotiate. Negotiations will continue for a long time.
Mr. Salhi, negotiations will continue for some time despite those incidents going on here and there. For example, the latest incident in Saudi Arabia?
It's hard to say. I think the extent to which this incidents, or what you call incidents, will cause damage. I think this outside variable remind me very well when you had President Arafat, President of National Authority, Palestinian, and Ishaq Rabin, because they were on the same page that they wanted Oslo to move forward. When there were so-called acts of terror, both leaders understood that for the negotiations to continue, this is over Oslo, these are seen as distractions. And if we apply that same logic today, that there is actually an intention by the negotiator to see to it these negotiations will continue, and then for sure, these are mere small facts that will have no bearing on the negotiations. But you could always use the money as an excuse to stop the negotiation, to launch another attacks on the other. So it might depend. And this shows how fragile is this situation. And anything can change the tide to the other side.
Mr. Dawood, as we look at the broader geopolitical pictures, we now see an increasingly multipolar environment, with China actively engaged in regional diplomacy, Russia expanding its strategic footprint, the European Union trying to maintain a role in nuclear verification and sanctions policy, with leaders like Donald Trump engaging directly with Xi Jinping, with Beijing, and Vladimir Putin present in Beijing this week. Are we witnessing a shift where the Iran file is no longer purely a U.S.-Iran issue, but part of a wider global power negotiation?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct, Miriam. So we saw this take place long before this, and then one of the markers, if you will, was Venezuela. The moment you touch Venezuela, then you start touching the supply chains feeding into China's economy, mostly on power supplies, energy supplies. And that, of course, has expanded, accelerated, magnified increased substantially with the Iran crisis. And so, yes, so the Chinese have absolutely a priority view on what's going on there, and they seek to influence. Remember, they've played a critical role in bringing together sort of a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So they're very critical in what's going to happen next. And so is Russia. Russia wants to absolutely undermine the clout of the West. It wants to make sure that this crisis hurts the West. And of course, the Europeans have their own interest, except they don't have, figures, iconic figures like Russia's, China's, and the United States. It's a different political system, but one that, of course, will play a major role going forward.
Mm-hmm. Professor Hamoud Salhi, what is your take on that?
I think the Chinese factor and Russian factor are very, very important. But at this point, we see more China exercising some kind of leverage or some kind of influence behind the scene, particularly with its role in supporting Pakistan and pushing for a resolution of the conflict. Additionally, the visit of President Donald Trump showed to us that the Chinese can play games and can use rhetoric in their favor. So, for example, they believe strongly that the Hormuz should be open because their interests are there, and they made it clear to the President Donald Trump that Hormuz should be open, which Donald Trump took as a win. But in reality, what the Chinese are after is to ensure that international law is implemented, that the blockade ends, and that the flow, most important, I think, of energy continues without any restriction, namely that Iran is respected its national sovereignty. So China has pressure, and particularly when it comes to the United States, and it play a major role in that, but so far it has been playing that behind the scene. The Russians have their own problems. You have Ukraine issue, and that sort of take most of their time, because they see what's happening in the Gulf as an opportunity for them also to settle their differences there in Ukraine. But they could also play a role in that they have a history in the Middle East, particularly in Syria. They have also strong partners in the region, and they could use that to their advantage. So we are shifting to that sort of world of multilateral polar system, in which the United States is increasingly becoming a sort of challenge in that role. But we have yet to see that challenge getting the United States to be forced to reverse its policy in the Middle East, and particularly in this case.
Mm-hmm. Maybe as a final question to you, Mr. Dawood, are we entering a genuine phase of long-term de-escalation today in the Middle East, specifically with Iran, or simply managing the tensions temporarily with some tactics of backing off before another major confrontation emerges in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, Miriam, of one of your previous guests that said everything is in the minds of Donald Trump, so to speak, right? So there's some of that. What I'm worried is, some of the positive messages that tend to come from the press. You notice, for example, anytime, the markets start getting negative, which, losing momentum, the barrel of oil growing. You see an article coming out of newspaper like Axios, for example, where it says, well, everything is going the right way. And so we are in a very ambivalent period, a very gray period where, as I said, people are talking, negotiators are negotiating. The military on both ends are doing what the militaries do, which is occasional events that we see. This is going to be, in my opinion, a long-term thing. What is the long-term? It's $1 billion question. I think that we are, one of the big markers would be the third calendar quarter of 2026, when you start seeing how sort of rising energy prices are affecting American companies. So far, they've been largely immune, with the exception of the companies that are very sensitive to energy price fluctuations, airlines, for example. But when you look at the latest earning results from large corporations and even some of my clients that are small and mid-sized companies, they tend to be doing well. The question is this going to be the case over the next 2-3 months as we head to the third quarter, the summer season? And that's, I don't think anybody has an answer except perhaps Donald Trump.
$1 billion question. Thank you so much, Mr. Adesri Dawood. You joined us live from Boston.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Hamoud Salhi, for participating in tonight's program, and you joined us live from California.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure seeing you again, Adesri.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you, dear viewers, for following tonight's edition. See you in the next ones.